All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to take a super high speed tour through the foundations of Japanese history. We're going to explore how this ancient culture, one of nature's spirits, somehow gave rise to one of the most legendary warrior classes ever. So, yeah, let's just dive right in.
So, let's start with a really big question. I mean, when you look at a landscape like this, what comes to mind? Probably peace, right? Tranquility. But this exact same environment is what forged the samurai. So, how on earth did that happen? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay, so everything, and I mean everything, really starts with Japan's earliest beliefs. And these beliefs were just completely tied up with the land itself. This relationship, it basically shaped their entire way of looking at the world.
And right at the heart of that worldview is Shintoism. Now, this isn't about a single, all-powerful god. It's really about animism, this idea that spirits, which they called kami, live in basically everything in the natural world. These kami could be the wind, a river, a mountain, you name it. But the biggest one, the most important of them all, was the sun goddess, Amaterasu. And this really helps you visualize it, right? For anyone who followed Shinto, a simple rock isn't, well, it's not just a rock. It could literally be the home of a powerful spirit. This deep, deep respect for nature and this focus on purity, these are pillars of Japanese culture that are still around today. Okay, so now let's see how this foundation starts to build into the next big era. As Japan's imperial court starts to come together, it's not happening in a bubble, right? A huge wave of new ideas starts flooding in from the Asian mainland, and it just sparks this incredible cultural golden age. And boom, all of a sudden, Buddhism arrives and just gets incredibly popular. And what's interesting is it exists right alongside Shintoism. And with it comes all this new stuff, new kinds of architecture like temples, and this totally revolutionary new technology, the Chinese writing system, or kanji. Japan just completely soaked it up.
And this is such a perfect example of Japanese innovation. See, they didn't just copy what they saw. They adapted it. They took that pagoda design and they engineered it with these super wide, heavy eaves. This created a structure that could actually flex and sway, making it amazingly resistant to earthquakes, which, was a constant threat in Japan. Meanwhile, back in the imperial capital, life during what's called the Heian period was just an explosion of high culture. The aristocrats were obsessed with poetry, crazy intricate fashions, all this subtle art. And it was in this super refined world that a courtier, a woman named Lady Murasaki Shikabu, wrote The Tale of Genji. And what makes this massive romance so revolutionary, what makes it the world's first novel, is its incredible psychological depth. It really gets into the inner lives of its characters in a way no one had ever done before. And just like they did with architecture, they innovated with language too. Those Chinese characters, kanji, they were pretty complex. So the Japanese developed their own phonetic alphabets, you've probably heard of them, hiragana and katakana, to better fit their own spoken language. And this is what created that unique three-alphabet system they still use today. But here's where things get really interesting. Because while all the aristocrats are in the capital writing poetry and worrying about their clothes, a completely different reality is taking shape out in the countryside. A new and very powerful warrior class was on the rise. So you can see this deep, deep split that was forming. In the capital, you've got the courtiers. Their power? It all comes from their fancy imperial titles. But out in the provinces, it's a different story. You have these powerful warlords carving out their own territories, called shon. And their power came from one thing: land, and the private armies they built to protect it. And eventually, this led to a total flip in power. The emperor, he basically became a figurehead. The real ruler of Japan was now the shogun, the top military commander. And here's how it worked. The shogun granted land to these powerful lords, the daimyo. And in return, the daimyo hired elite warriors to protect that land. And those warriors were the samurai. So who were these warriors anyway? Well, the samurai weren't just soldiers for hire. They lived by this incredibly strict code that pretty much defined every single part of their lives. And of course, nothing symbolizes the samurai more than their sword, the katana. This was so much more than just a tool for fighting. The samurai literally believed the katana was an extension of their soul. It was a symbol of their honor, their commitment, everything. This whole sense of duty was all written down in a code called Bushido, which basically means the way of the warrior.
It was this super demanding code of ethics where loyalty, courage, and honor were everything. Seriously, to be dishonored was the absolute worst thing that could happen. And to get the kind of mental strength this required, a lot of samurai turned to Zen Buddhism because it's so focused on discipline and meditation. Yeah, this commitment to honor was so absolute that there was actually a specific way to get it back if you failed or were defeated. It was called seppuku. And this ritual suicide, it wasn't seen as a tragedy. It was seen as the final ultimate way for a warrior to prove their sincerity and restore their honor, even in death. So for more than 100 years, Japan was just torn apart by civil war. You had rival daimyo and their samurai armies all fighting for control. This incredibly violent time, known as the Sengoku Jidai, or the Age of Warring States, would finally be brought to an end by 3 legendary figures. So the big question is, after all that chaos and all that war, who were these guys? Who had the vision, the power, and let's be honest, the ruthlessness to build a single nation out of all that destruction? First up, you have Oda Nobunaga. He was a brilliant and totally ruthless general who kicked off the whole process of unification with just pure military force. He was followed by his best general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He picked up where Nobunaga left off and continued the campaign, using a smart mix of force and sneaky diplomacy to get more of Japan under his control. And finally, there was Tokugawa Ieyasu. He was patient, he was strategic, and he was the one who would ultimately finish the job. You know, there's this great old saying about the 3 of them. Nobunaga pounds the rice cake, Hideyoshi kneads it, and Ieyasu is the one who gets to sit down and eat it. He just outlasted them all and officially put an end to that long era of war. So, through their combined efforts over decades, these 3 men finally put a stop to the kind of constant warfare you see here. They basically hammered together all those broken up domains of the daimyo and forged, for the first time in over a century, a single, unified Japan, all ruled by the shogun. And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. Okay, so Japan was finally united. It was at peace, but it was still a feudal society of lords and warriors. So what happens next? What would it take for this nation to totally transform itself and become a modern world power? Well, that's a story for another time. Thanks for joining me on this one.